Superintendent can't be here today. He's at a personnel committee meeting elsewhere on campus, but he sends his regards. I'm John Pavlik. I'm chair of the Department of Journalism and Media Studies here and director of the Journalism Research Institute here at Rutgers, and we really are delighted to welcome you here to Rutgers, to welcome the Hyperlocal News Association. And SKY, our school, that's what we call it. We're reaching for the sky. It's our acronym, School of Communication and Information. We are full and enthusiastic support of the Hyperlocal News Association as it provides its encouragement and its energy and enthusiasm to build robust reporting about government and our local communities. One of the adages of journalism in our communities is that all politics is local. And of course, if that's, to the extent that that's true, we need robust reporting about politics and government to keep our citizenry informed and to keep democracy flourishing. We've seen recently around the world, especially in the Middle East, what happens when democracy and journalism has been restricted for many years. And I think Hyperlocal News is offering an opportunity to really rebuild our local community journalism and to offer democracy an opportunity to really regain a strong foothold on the local level. So we are offering our support in any ways we can to the Hyperlocal News Association as it grows, as it builds its own community throughout New Jersey. And to that extent, of course, we also are encouraging our students to get involved in hyperlocal news organizations around the state. It's a great way to get experience and offer a way to get service into the communities that are being served by those local news associations. Internships are a wonderful way for our students to get involved. So if you're running a hyperlocal news association, I would encourage you to consider an internship opportunity with our students. We have an active internship program here at Rutgers, and we're delighted to work with you in building internship opportunities. So we are delighted to welcome you here today, and I look forward to this panel this morning. So thank you again, and welcome to Rutgers.
Thank you. I just wanted some housekeeping items before we get started with our keynote. Just so you know, today we have a mix of editors, publishers, citizen advocates, citizen journalists, but I think we're all here united under one common purpose, a better New Jersey, and that's really what the Hyperlocal News Association is about, that we need to be an engaged citizenry, we need to be an informed citizenry. So as much as we can facilitate both community interaction with hyperlocal news sites, and then we can also provide the free training and resources of the emerging and the established hyperlocal community. That's really what today is about. And I just wanted to recognize that we have an advisory board, which a couple of people couldn't be here today, but I do want to recognize Barbara Reed from the Society of Professional Journalists and here at Rutgers, and she arranged the room today. So thank you, Barbara. We also have Steve Johnson from Patch. He's on our advisory board. Chair Pavlik, thank you so much for coming today. As you walked in, you were handed one of two forms. There was either the Hyperlocal News Association form, which hopefully, if you have not already joined, please do so. It will allow you to be informed of upcoming events. We are planning on having trainings every 2 months devoted on helping reporters learn how to better cover their local community. So today we're focusing on school budgets. Our next one will be in 2 months. We'll be doing municipal budgets. So please fill out that form so you can be kept up to date. Also, if you join, we offer sidebar civic stories. These are articles that we will write that you can use. It's free content we'll just give you to help try to motivate more citizen interaction in your community. Educating citizens, if they're reading a story about a proposal going before their city council, how can that citizen then get engaged in the process? As a sidebar, not incorporating the story, we don't want to, breach journalism ethics, but it is a way for you to get your community engaged in the story. We also have roadmaps, so as I said, we'll be having these roadmap stories focusing you on what the major political and power shifts are in a community. So today is on the school budget. For the other people in the room, we have the citizen campaign, Join the Call. If you fill that out, you become a member of the Citizens Campaign. We offer free training, such as our citizen journalism class, which is available on our website, jointhecampaign.com. Fill that out, and then you will have access to our free resources of a book, free mentors and coaches. So if you are interested in becoming a citizen journalist but don't know how to start, you can call me and I'll help you. And then finally, launch a website for the Hyperlocal News Association. It is www.njhna.org, where we will have our last session on the video, as well as today's session on video. You can watch it there, and we will be posting resources as they come up. We're also on Twitter at NJ Hyperlocal, so please do that. And we also are on Facebook. So find us on Facebook, Twitter, and visit our website. Also visit the Citizens Campaign website, jointhecampaign.com. And we also are on Twitter and Facebook, so please become our fan. So that is all my housekeeping items. I will be here all day, so if you have any questions that you can please come talk to me. But to start, I'm really honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Gene Maeroff. He is currently the Edison School Board President. He was elected in 2008, and he became the president in 2010. He's also a senior fellow at Teachers College at Columbia University. For 16 years, he was a national education correspondent for the New York Times, and he is a very accomplished author, having written 13 books, and his most recent one was published this past December, titled School Boards in America, a flawed exercise in democracy. So everyone please give a hand for Gene Maeroff.
I'll do my own housekeeping, as they said. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and it's really an honor to be invited to give this address by the Citizens Campaign, and I praise Harry Zicki and his colleagues for all the good work that they're doing. And I really welcome the opportunity to speak to a group of people who are concerned about information and public affairs at the local level. Because increasingly, the local level is being ignored in terms of dissemination of information. And I use the example, for example, of the Star-Ledger, a distinguished newspaper which has been did cover the local level very well, and then in a money-saving move, and it's not surprising when newspapers are trying to save money these days, pretty much shut down the local coverage. And now they, for example, I live in Middlesex County, and there's the section that comes with the editorials and opinion pieces, and on the front it says Middlesex County. Well, it doesn't really cover Middlesex County anymore. There's just a page in there of shorts that may or may not be from Middlesex County. And I understand why the Ledger and papers all around the country have had to do this. We're in the midst of a situation in which daily newspaper journalism is being redefined, and to some extent redefining itself. And frankly, 10 years from now, who knows what it's going to look like, but we have a whole generation of young people today who don't believe anybody should pay for news, that it should be free. And we're on the brink of more news organizations, the big news organizations, trying to charge for their news. And we'll see what happens with that. But the result of it is this neglect of the local level. And that, to me, is a threat to the democratic process, because if people really don't know what's going on in the school boards and the town councils and the planning boards and all the other local entities that make these decisions that cost the taxpayers so much money, then we're in big trouble. There were enough wrongdoers, especially, unfortunately, in the Garden State when they were being covered. Imagine what's going to happen without anybody shining any light on them. And so a lot of this burden falls to you folks who have an abiding interest in the local level, much more than most people. I recently had conversations with a man by the name of George Fisher, who's a lawyer in Princeton and lives in Hamilton. And on his own, on his own. He was once in the 90s or the 80s a member of the school board in Hamilton. He put together this voluminous report about wrongdoing and nepotism and other kinds of problems with the Hamilton School Board and administration. He can't find anybody who wants to write anything about it, anybody who wants to look at his report. So if any of you are interested or from Hamilton, get in touch with me afterward, and I'll put you in touch with George Fisher, because that's the kind of thing that we need hyperlocal reporting on. School boards are really easy to overlook, despite the fact that school boards spend almost always more money than the local government does. Most people in the general public really have no sense of that. They don't really understand the role that school boards play and the potential school boards have for affecting their taxes and their lives. And so the extent to which you get involved with the coverage of school boards and everything around them, the better. And I think this conference is just great for trying to inform you and interest you in that. Collectively, the almost 14,000 school boards in this country spend between $560 billion and $600 billion annually. Now, go back a couple of years, that would have sounded like a lot of money. It doesn't sound like as much money anymore when you look at our country's debt, but it is a lot of money. And they dispense jobs. They're jobs factories is what they are. People don't realize that. Sometimes you look at some of the larger school systems, and it looks like they gave birth to entire families, uncles and aunts and fathers, and sons and daughters, and wives and husbands, and this kind of hiring goes on. My new book, I have an entire chapter. It's called Jobs, Jobs, Jobs. And if you have people on school boards who are not as honest as they ought to be, they use it to dispense jobs through favoritism, patronage, and nepotism. So that's something to look for. I'm an anomaly, as you may have gotten a sense of in the introduction. I'm a person who spent a career writing about education, doing research and writing about education policy. I'm here as the president of a school board, which I got elected to 3 years ago, and some people encouraged me to run, and I had a sense of public service, and I was curious, because this is my field, so I ran. And as much as I knew about schools before that, it's opened up my eyes even more, and becoming president a year ago, I learned even more. People frequently ask about this unusual route that I've taken to a seat in the school board, and my best answer to that really is from the preface of my book. Let me just read this paragraph to you, because it's my own awakening, my epiphany, my learning on the school board. For me, already familiar with the world of education, service on a school board was unlike any other experience that I had had. It burdened me with legal and fiduciary responsibilities. It put limits on what I could say publicly about what I had learned. It thrust me, a person accustomed to interviewing others, into the role of interviewing members of the media. It put extensive demands on my free time without any remuneration whatsoever. It threw me into close and continuing contact with 8 fellow board members, most of whom, most of the time, were generally cordial, despite differences that arose. It exposed me to the world of politics and the infighting, gossiping, and maneuvering that unfortunately insinuate themselves into the work of what are supposedly nonpartisan bodies. I know that your very excellent panel today, which will be on after I'm finished speaking, will deal with areas of coverage that you ought to consider when when it comes to writing and covering or monitoring. Some of you aren't doing any writing, which as concerned citizens, you're monitoring local school boards and local school systems. So I'm going to talk about a few matters and leave much of this to the panel. And I want to encourage you during the brief remarks that I'm about to make, that if you have any comments or questions at any time, just thrust your hand into the air, shake it or something so I notice you. And let's make this as interactive as we can. One way to get started on this is to look at the calendar of events. And we happen to be embarking on a period right now for school boards and school systems in which the calendar is very heavy. March 8th is the date on which nominating petitions have to be submitted by people who want to run for school boards, all through the state and all the approximately 600 school boards in the state, except for the very few that are appointed. In the whole country, more than 90% of school boards are elected, fewer than 10% are appointed. And there are all kinds of, the subtitle of my book is a flawed exercise in democracy. Well, there are all kinds of flaws, either way you do it. And some people think there are fewer flaws if it's appointed, but that can be flawed as well, and the flaws continue after that. So if you are going to be somebody who wants to really take this interest in the school board, and you want to start out by trying it in a few weeks to this March 8th deadline on the submission of the nominating petitions that people submit on their own behalf, although somebody else may trigger it, I suppose. Question becomes, who are these candidates? Well, their names will all be available for the first time. It might be up to you to find out, and certainly have the help of Google, Bing, and any other source that you want to do research. Who are they? Goes well beyond their names. What have they been doing with themselves? How have they been spending their time? Why are they running? Now, you might have to call them and ask them why they're running, but don't hesitate to do that. Try to go beyond the platitudes. Keep pressing them for why they're running. What do they hope to achieve by being on a school board? What do they hope to achieve? I can tell you from my experience, one has to work with other people to achieve much of anything on a school board. We have a 9-member school board. Some school boards have 5, some have 7. Probably 9 is bigger than most of the country. Probably 5 or 7 is more typical. There are even 3-member school boards in some places. It's hard to fathom the possibility of a school board with an even number of members because too often the votes are split and nothing will be accomplished. Then you want to try to find out, are there any slates here? Are there people who are running together to run as a slate? And we should identify the slates. And do the slates represent certain kinds of interests? Then, not long after that petition deadline, March 14th will be the last day for one of these people who submitted a petition to withdraw. And some people do. Some people do because they see, well, I don't have much of a chance, I'm going to pull out of this, or some people are talked out of it, and so support can coalesce around some other candidate. So watch for that. And then that reconfigures it. If anybody pulls out, it reconfigures the campaign. Last year in Edison, I wasn't running, as was mentioned, I ran in 08 and for my 3-year term. But last year, there were 7 candidates who filed petitions. Then one of the 7 pulled out. It went down to 6, and it was very clear. There were 3 people running together against 3 people running together. So you had a face-to-face face-off, and it was 3-3, and it made it a lot more interesting than if this wild card had been in as a single candidate. Now, what happens next? A few days later, there's a drawing. It's kind of like those ones you see on television for the lottery. A drum might be spun, or a box might be mixed. and somebody reaches into there and pulls them out, all of them one after another. That determines the place on the ballot. Now, place on the ballot is particularly important in school board elections because there's not a column of Democrats, there's not a column of Republicans. Everybody is mixed together and they're put in order according to this drawing. I was really lucky the first time I ran, the only time I ran so far as the school board, for the school board in 08, my name was pulled out first. And as they say in my book, it's like being getting the rail position in the Kentucky Derby, because a lot of people, unfortunately, don't know any of the people whose names are on the ballot when they go to vote, and so you just start from the top and see 3 names that appeal to them, and they vote for them, and that's it. And so if your name's first, you have more chance of being included. So you want to take note of that drawing for positions. Now, in the midst of all of these dates that I've been talking about, I haven't even finished that, the budget is under review in the local school district that you might be monitoring or writing about or covering. So you got the budget going on at the same time. And the budgets have to be completed and submitted in March. And so that's another thing that you want to watch. It's thrown into the mix and could be very likely become part of the debate during the election campaign for school board positions, with the people who are on the board, of course, defending the budget, and the people who are going against the incumbents saying, oh, that budget's bad for this or that reason. Now, one of the difficulties that I've always seen in journalism, it's understandable why it's happened, it's existed for years, is what I call equivalency. And you get somebody who's criticizing the budget, and you feel the only way that you can be fair is to get someone on the other side who's defending the budget. But you know, you don't necessarily emerge with truth from equivalency. So it becomes incumbent on you to provide some of your own objective interpretation, so that if you want to take these quotes on either side, whether it's the budget or any other argument, you can say, yes, but. And it's not a matter of encouraging you necessarily to take sides, but to point out certain facts so that you're not trying to tell readers, listeners, whatever, that here you have 2 arguments, they're equal, decide between them. Because sometimes they're just not equal. And some people are just wrong-minded or deliberately trying to mislead other people. Now, there's another thing that could be going on at the same time. In our district in Edison, which is the 5th largest school district in the state, not only are you going to have this election going on, everything in the election campaign and the budget, but there will be a teacher contract that's expiring on June 30th. Now, all the teacher contracts, all of the employee contracts in the state don't expire at the same time. Even in a single district, they don't expire at the same time. Ours happens to expire on June 30th. So we have that. So as a person who's conscientiously trying to report, trying to monitor this, you have to do that at the same time. Imagine how difficult it is to sit on a school board that's going to have a contract with teachers running out, and at the same time, you're putting together a budget for the first year of the contractual period. And you haven't agreed with the employees about what the contract's going to be in the first year. It's an impossible task, I must tell you. It really is. Because you're going to go to the bargaining table and you're going to talk about what the first year of the contract is going to be, and meanwhile, you're putting out a budget in which you're not supposed to hide anything, in which you're talking about what you're going to do by way of compensation and benefits for the employees. So this just gives you some sense of how difficult this is. You'll want to, really, if you're not already, you'll want to be going to the board meetings at this time, because the public is allowed to speak at board meetings, which probably I don't have to tell you, you all know, and probably some of you are people who have spoken or do speak at board meetings. A lot of interesting things come out of the public space. And just because it's they're public, it doesn't make it right. You have to check on that. But those board meetings really become very interesting at this time of the year. I was just sitting next to Jonathan Busch, who's going to be on the panel after me, and he is no longer, he changed law firms, but he was one of the lawyers of the firm that was our legal representation, and he reminded me of a meeting we had last spring when we were trying to put together a very, very controversial budget after the state cut millions and millions of dollars from us, including 55% of our state aid. That meeting went until 4 o'clock in the morning, and Jonathan was asking me if people have any more of those meetings till 4 o'clock in the morning. I hope not, but who knows? That could happen if you get kind of a turnout. So you'll be looking at the budget during this time, but you'll also be looking at just the month-by-month agenda. And the agenda's there. You should get that agenda to read it. There are stories. A lot of people think that school board meetings have to be, or what school boards do, let me put it that way. What school boards do is necessarily boring by definition. I don't think it is. I think you can just go into the personnel appointments alone and talk about who's getting appointed, how much they're getting paid, why they're getting paid that, why they're getting appointed, did this job exist before, and this kind of information is available. There's a lot to do. If I were a hyperlocal journalist, I would be delving into that. I would be delving into all kinds of things. You look at, there's something called longevity pay that exists in many, many school districts. Plus there's pay for getting more, doing more studying beyond the bachelor's level. And people get increases for that. That become part of their base pay. And why not add them all up every month? How much is the school board dispensing? Is the school system spending on this? And this really adds to the cost of personnel. And this is public information. It's something to deal with. There are periodic reports on test scores. If they're not being reported at the board meeting, well, the information exists somewhere, and you should get it. Because test scores now, for the last 10 years, have special significance. Federal government in 2002 passed a law called No Child Left Behind, and it required the disaggregation of scores for the first time. Before, especially in a place like New Jersey, where there are lots of high scores, New Jersey does really well with high scores, but they mask the low scores. And so if you're only dealing with these averages and how many students are up at the top and all, you lose sight of the fact that there are some students who aren't getting as much out of school as other students. And this is what caused No Child Left Behind to be enacted. It was proposed by President Bush. It was very vigorously backed by the Democrats as well as the Republicans. Ted Kennedy was a big proponent of it. Because for the first time, as a result of No Child Left Behind, school boards, school administrations, districts, the public were forced to confront the fact that here are the separate scores for ethnic groups, for English language learners, for disabled students, and then it's possible to see, are they doing as well as the students, other students in the school district? Of course, Matt's going against other school districts too. So this is another great source of information for you. Nobody's raised their hand. No questions so far? Okay. I'm not going to talk too much longer because you have 10 minutes.
You said it was the impossibility of putting together a budget when you don't even have a union contract done. How important is that budget that is put together in signaling to the union this is what we're looking at, or does the union not care? They'll stomp up and down, get what they want, and crowd out the rest of it, and the rest of it's much smaller than the pay. How does it work? So signaling, and does it matter?
It is a signal. If you're at a point where a contract is expiring, but you have to prepare a budget in advance of that expiration, it is very important. It does signal to the union, and once you have that budget approved, that's how much can be spent. That's what's to be spent. Now, items can be moved around within the budget. You're not obligated to spend it on what you have in the budget. And if you end up with a contract that calls for spending more on compensation than you anticipated in that budget, which represents the first year of the contract, then that money has to come out of someplace else. And if it's not coming out of the 80% that goes to compensation and benefits, where's it coming from? It's coming from the students. That's where it's coming from. Yes?
Can you explain again how it works for the board when they're negotiating contracts and looking at their budget? Because we just had a situation, I'm from Kent, and our board approved the contract this past May. It was a 9.7.
Last name?
Last May. And it was an increase of 9.75.
9% increase
9.75 increase on 3 years.
over 3 years.
Over 3 years. And this year, our budget increased for about $6 million. And we know, I asked, why is it, at this time, why is the budget increasing? And the answer was charter schools, which actually charter schools just increased by $500,000. And the other, almost $5 million are from salaries and benefits. So
Yes.
they just decided on their own that they wanted to pay, that's my impression, that they wanted to pay the union so much money without taking into consideration what the budget was, especially nowadays.
Well, if they didn't do it in conjunction with the budget, then the budget is only going to reduce so much money that's already stated, and then the money is provided through the taxes, so it has to come from someplace else. One of the factors to be really careful of on that, if they say what the percentage is on the increase, sometimes in some places they're talking about the percentage of the increase on what people are getting paid for, as compared to the salary guide that existed before. What was it? What was the bottommost pay and what was the topmost pay? But it doesn't take into consideration necessarily, it may or may not, you have to look into that, what I just described as, say, the longevity pay, the pay for accumulating more credits beyond the bachelor's degree. It doesn't take in consideration necessarily, it may, the increases within the salary guide. Salary guides could run anywhere from 10 years to 25 years in terms of getting to the top to the bottom. But inside the salary guide, if you look at it and get someone who knows it to explain it to you, the steps are not even. And all of a sudden you'll see some people at certain points in the salary guide before they get to the top getting raises in a single year of 15, 18%. Because these salary guides, what they do is they take the new raise and they throw that in along with what was in there before. So I think there are a lot of questions to ask you that's what happened on Trent, and they're probably not answered very easily. But do remember that once there's a budget, that's all the money that's going to be provided for the school system that year, because the budget then is translated into a tax rate. Yes, sir.
One number also, I'll tell you this, they got the cap now because of the 2% cap this year. That's that rate. If it's similar to what's being said there, if it is 3% each year, they're going to have to, they can increase expenses even if ratables went down, which is a different idea. But the amount of money that was provided by the township the year before can only go up 2%, with the exception of healthcare costs. Healthcare costs or something.
Well, you can put those within the cap too. It's up to the school board to decide. School board doesn't have to put health care or capital outside the cap. If it wants to, it can include it within the cap.
They can.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is this, in my township, we don't ever get state money, so there was no deficit to us. However, we go down our school budget this year, okay? And the majority of the residents really wanted to say to the educators, we we understand you should get an equal salary, but we believe that you should pay more for your health care participation, and you should participate more in the compensation of your, the money that is paid to your pension. They didn't do it. So what they did is they took away services from our kids. Now, here's the part that I find offensive about that. Okay? One, the Board of Education doesn't know how to negotiate. Okay? And the other thing is that our tax dollars are for education. Okay? And if the teachers, as a collective group, are saying to us, no, we're not going to do that, then why don't we, as the parents, as the taxpayers, have the ability to say, to hell with you, you're going to do it our way, but we're going to let you all go. I mean, I just find that offensive, that's all. So what we did is we took $1.5 million away from services from our kids. So I don't get that. I really don't. We're not happy, no one in the town. So we're not going to pass the budget this year either.
When a district is in the midst of an existing contract, contract has to be honored no matter what happens to the budget. If the budget is voted down and then it goes to the town council, when it went to our town council last year after it was voted down, we cut millions already. They had to cut another $6.5 million that were directed by the council. And as this woman just said, it comes out of the hides of the kids if you're in the midst of a contract, which will be in most cases. So what did we do? Cut full-day kindergarten back to half-day, which is about as aggressive as you could do. We eliminated sports in the middle school. We charged people for busing that had been free. We slashed spending for textbooks to a ridiculous level. That just, we cut half of the co-curricular activities. It comes out of the hides of the kids. The public doesn't understand it. They don't understand that the contract has to be honored no matter what. It's a little different situation when you're at the point where your budget for the year that's coming up is going to be the first year of the contract. There may be some back and forth on that, but once the budget is passed, you're locked into the amount. Now, I don't want to take time away from this panel, and I want to end by reading you something that I wrote about school boards here. Above all, a school board exists to ensure that students in a given district get the best possible education. Board members address issues that extend over a wide horizon, but they should never lose sight of their main responsibility for doing all they can to facilitate learning for every child. This is so obvious as to leave readers wondering why I even mention it. Yet, all too often, school boards get so tangled in thickets of minutiae that they neglect to walk the straight course that they should follow in the pursuit of solid education. And the underpinning of democracy are weakened when students receive anything less. Such failure diminishes their life prospects. There should be no alternative to governing well. And that's what school boards are charged with doing, with governing. Don't administer. And if they do administer, that's called micromanagement, and you should identify it when it's happening and let people know that school board members are trying to micromanage. So I'm going to end there. Some people ask me about my book. I brought a few copies with me. If anybody wants to see me after getting a copy of my book. But I really appreciate your time, and like you, I look forward to this fine panel. Thank you.
We've got a copy of the book. It's fabulous. We're all trading around the office. So thank you, Jean, so much. Everyone, another round of applause. Our panelists, as we do a microphone, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Testing, test.
So we'll have this for the panel. So for the next part, we are getting into more nuts and bolts of the school budget process. It's my honor to call up first Jonathan Busch. He is a member of the school law team at Schwartz Simon, Edelstein, and Kelso. His firm represents more than 100 school board clients. Jonathan has extensive experience in Oprah, the records law, the Sunshine Law, school board ethics, and he's a very well-published lawyer, and we are very honored to have him. We also have joining us, and you can just come on up when you're ready, Valerie Goger. Valerie has been the superintendent of schools for the Bernards Township Board of Education since 1998. She is responsible for the management of 5,700 students in the school district, which includes 4 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school. And she is a former business administrator for 18 years. She was a teacher for 8 years, so she brings a very unique perspective on the school budget process, having seen it from every angle. And finally, to close it out, we have John Mooney. John is a founding editor and education writer for NewJerseySpotlight.com. Please go check it out after you're done, NJSpotlight.com. He covered education in New Jersey for over 15 years as a reporter for the New York Star Ledger and the Bergen Record, and as a contributing writer for the New York Times. He has won numerous awards, and he has spoken at several conferences and other events, and we are just really excited to have all of you, so please get comfortable. There's a microphone. I've asked each of them to give. They all have their orders of what they're supposed to talk about today for you, but then we're going to open up, and I really want to encourage a back and forth, open dialogue after they've given their presentation. So please hold questions until all 3 have spoken, and then we'll have the Q&A.
As an old teacher, I have to stand. Can't sit. Good teachers don't sit. I'm going to. Is this?
Is it green?
It's not green.
That's it. No.
Okay, thanks. I just want to go over with you real budget basics, and later on, afterwards, if you have any more detailed questions, I'd be happy to go into them. I am the superintendent in Bernards Township, and I've been putting budgets together for 30 years, so I have a pretty good handle on it, both as a business administrator and as a superintendent, and I'm pretty objective about it after 30 years. I know that we have parents come to the microphone, very emotional. High school kids come to the microphone at board meetings, very emotional, but we do try to look at it in a macro view, and we do examine our budget from year to year. Most of you should have your paper now. Let me just tell you how a budget is made in New Jersey, for the most part. I'll say 95% of the districts. Basically, you have a tax levy. In Bernards Township, the tax levy supports 95% of the budget. There are special needs districts where that is not the case. There are other districts where maybe tax levy is supporting 50%. It varies. But in Bernards Township, and that's what I'll reference, 95% of our budget is supported by taxes. So there is a cap on how much you can increase those taxes. Therefore, you can see that in a district where 95% of your budget is controlled by a cap on taxes, it's a little bit different and a little more deep impact than if only 50% of your budget is being impacted by a cap. Now, you have your taxes as the base. To that, you can add state aid, if you're lucky enough anymore to be receiving state aid, and increase your budget by that amount. It has nothing to do with the 2%. You just increase your taxes by 2%, and then you can add on to that. If someone were to come along and in their will bequeath to Bernards Township $1 million, we could take that $1 million and put it on top of that 2% cap and increase our budget by that much. The cap is only meant to contain taxes. So you have miscellaneous rental revenue. You might have some interest coming in from the money that you have in the bank, although that's negligible now. But altogether, you put that stuff in a bunch, in a pile, and that's what your budget is. Now, in Bernards Township, typically in the last few years when we've had a 4% cap, our increase each year was about $3 million. Now, the cap was cut in half, down to 2%, so our increase, obviously, cut in half. We can only raise taxes by $1.5 million. Now, I've either got to find some alternative funding to fill in that other $1.5 million, or I've got to cut program by $1.5 million. That's a difficult task, and one that, as I say, the parents get very emotional about. The major cost areas in my budget, and this is a pretty general breakdown for most districts. Their percentages might move a little bit. Salaries and benefits, 72% of the budget. It's locked in, salaries and benefits. Operations and maintenance, 11%. Transportation. You know what salaries and benefits are. You know what operations and maintenance are. You may not know what transportation is. In a district where all of the students live within 2 miles of their school, let's take New Providence in Union County. All the kids in that town live within 2 miles of their school. New Providence provides no transportation. It's not mandated. But if you are in a town and you have children who live more than 2 miles from their school, or if they're high school kids, more than 2.5 miles from their school, you must provide transportation. And you must provide a seat for every one of those children that's eligible, whether they want it or not. I can tell you the majority of high school kids are not getting themselves on a bus. They either go with a friend, or they don't like to ride the bus. You will see, as I'm sure you all have seen, buses driving around your town, half empty. Many parents of kindergarten children don't want the little ones to get on the bus, so they drive them. But that's a state mandate. You must require a seat for every child who's eligible. Now, you must also require, in your town, for non-public students, kids going to a Catholic school, a Jewish school, a Montessori school, Pingree, Seton Hall Prep, you must provide transportation if they live more than 2 miles and less than 20 miles away from the private school they go to. If they're high school kids, more than 2.5 and less than 20. If you can't provide a bus for them, you've got to pay the parents $884 each year. It's called aid in lieu of transportation. Now, we don't get state aid for that anymore. So in my district, we spend almost $500,000 on non-public transportation. I don't think most people in our town understand that. It's taxpayers' money going for transportation to private school. That's a big chunk. Also in transportation, 60% of our transportation to and from school is spent on general education students. 40% of it is spent on special education students. Only 12% of our enrollment is special ed, but we spend 40% transporting those students. I don't say anything today with bias any way, which way. As I said before, I'm pretty objective when it comes to building a budget, but I just want you to have the facts. And these are details that you can ask about in your own district. Percentage of money spent on special ed, general ed, on non-public students, things that most of the public in general are not aware of. So that's the breakdown on transportation. And then special education tuition, we spend 5% of our budget on that. I can talk a lot about special education and the mandates, the state mandates, and most of what our budgets address are mandated by the state. It's amazing how little leeway a Board of Education has in determining how they're going to spend their money. Everything else, after I listed all those percentages for you, everything else in the pot, computers, textbooks, professional development, desks in your classroom, a pickup truck to help with the snow removal. All of that amounts to 5% of the budget. So you have very little flexibility in spending money. So the only place you can go really is to people, because 72% of your budget is salaries and benefits. That's where you've got to look. You can ask for labor concessions. Last year, I know you recall that the governor pushed very hard, encouraging residents to vote down any local budget in which the teachers did not accept a pay freeze. He advocated for that. Most districts went to their associations, their teacher associations, and asked to open up a contract, or if the contract was ending, asked them whether or not they would take some kind of concession. Very few districts in the state took that up. I think one of the reasons was, starting July 1st, if your contract was up, the new 1.5% cap, is kind of a health surcharge, if you will, was kicking in. The kind of the feeling of the teachers was, hey, you're already banging me for 1.5%. Why do you want me now to take another percent or another 2% off? In my district, our contract ended on June 30th, and we did not have a new contract negotiated. And our teachers, starting July 1st, just had their same salaries last year, minus 1.5%. So actually, now we're more than halfway through the year, and we still don't have a settlement. So our teachers are actually paying 1.5% more than they received last year. Where do you go next? Well, the most obvious place to go if you're looking to cut down on personnel is to go to your non-educational areas, custodial, maintenance, food service, transportation, maybe even technology, and privatize. It's very difficult to privatize because of what Jean said. In some districts, there is great patronage, and many of the custodians live in town. It's not politically wise, maybe, for board members to then vote them out of a job. Typically, they are offered a job when the new company comes in, but at lower wages, less health benefits than they were getting through the Teachers Association. So in Bernards, we privatized food services, the buildings and grounds, transportation 12, 13, 15 years ago. So we don't have that well to draw from. So next, also we do have shared services with our township. It's something that districts are looking into more and more. In Bernards, our municipal employees do all of our snow removal, and also the engineering department gives us a great deal of help on capital projects during the year, saves us a lot of money. In turn, the township recreation department uses our facilities all year long for basketball, for volleyball, outside fields. The next place, the only place you can go then is the educational programs. And first and foremost, when you're talking about reducing educational programs, you have to think about tenure. Tenure in New Jersey is given to all certificated staff. Certificated staff means teachers, nurses, guidance counselors, social workers, occupational therapists, anybody who has to have a New Jersey Department of Education certification. It includes administrators, not superintendents, but principals, assistant principals, supervisors, directors. Anybody who needs a Department of Ed certification receives tenure after 3 years and a day, or 3 years within 4 years. But 3 years and a day is the typical time for achieving tenure. When someone has tenure, seniority kicks in. For example, in my district, we had to look at going to a half-day kindergarten, as regressive as that may be, because we are looking at trying to make up a $1.5 million gap, going from the 4% cap to the 2% cap. We've got to make up $1.5 million. So last summer, we did a lot of work. We visited a lot of districts. We looked at their high school schedules and middle school models, what kind of kindergarten program, what kind of special ed program, what administrative structure they had. We looked at all of that. We wrote a 95-page report and put it on our website. It's got some good background, if I can say so myself, I wrote the report, but it's got some good background on state aid, the first 10 pages or so, if you want to access that at bernardsboe.com. And we made recommendations to the board on which they acted in the fall. And so we said we were going to reduce our kindergarten program, excuse me, from full day down to half day. Well, in doing that, many parents said, oh, aside from being disappointed that was going to happen, they said, oh, Jean is such a wonderful kindergarten teacher, and now she's going to be let go, and she's worked here for 20 years. Well, no, Jean, the wonderful kindergarten teacher, was not being let go in that case. We would need to look at all of our elementary teachers, because that's the certification you get. For elementary, you don't get a kindergarten or a third grade certification. So now you have to look at all of your non-tenured teachers. And maybe Jean now gets moved up to teach 5th grade, and some other kindergarten teacher gets moved up to teach 1st grade, and a 5th grade teacher is let go, and a 3rd grade teacher is let go. Tenure trumps all. Just remember that. Now, if you are in a bad situation, like Edison was last year, letting so many people go, and you actually run through all of your non-tenured staff, you've then got this seniority kicks in within tenured people. Certifications are different. There's elementary certification, there's middle school certification, there's by subject in middle school and high school. So you have a physics certified teacher. A physics certified teacher can't be moved over to teach chemistry. If you have 5 physics teachers at your high school and all they have certification in is physics, and they're all tenured, and you have 5 biology teachers who are non-tenured, you can't let those biology teachers go and move the physics teachers into biology. You're only tenured within your certification area, okay? The state mandates that we operate within are really very binding. I think that sometimes the public thinks, well, why don't you just cut this? Why don't you just cut that? There are so many requirements that we have. For example, phys ed. Every student in New Jersey must have phys ed 150 minutes a week. That's a lot. Some states have no requirements for phys ed. Some states have requirements 1 year in high school you have to take it, or maybe you have to take it 2 times a week in elementary school. New Jersey is really just about the strictest in the country on phys ed. Elementary world languages, elementary enrichment programs, middle school enrichment programs. These are all required by state mandate. High school graduation requirements, I have them listed there for you. I don't need to read them out to you, but students have to take that minimum 120 credits beginning with this year's freshman class in those areas. They can add to that with electives. The standardized testing in grades 3 through 8 now, and in grades 11, is all based on these mandates. So you've heard people say, oh, gee, you're only teaching to the test. Well, yeah, in some cases you are teaching to the test because you need to teach to the test, because those students have to be proficient in those areas. However, there is a spirit of the law, and then there's, actually meeting the letter of the law. In our district, we had to make so many cuts the last 3 years. We've cut elementary enrichment. We've cut elementary world languages. What we have, instead of, the kids used to get Spanish in grades 1 through 5 once a week. Okay, it's not a lot, but they got Spanish once a week from a certified Spanish teacher. Well, 2 years ago when we had to cut back, we cut that out and we gave the 4th and 5th grade classroom teachers Latin workbooks. It's something, it meets the letter of the law, it certainly doesn't meet the spirit of the law. Same thing with enrichment. We used to have an enrichment teacher in every one of our elementary schools, giving great opportunities to the kids. Well, we had to let those people go too. And what we offer now is a math program before school in the morning that you have to be tested for, and then if you qualify, you can enter into that program. So again, we met the letter of the law, but certainly not the spirit of the law. Special education, we must serve students ages 3 to 21. So that's 5 years more education than the general ed students receive. You will look at a special ed budget in your town and say, wow, that's pretty big. Well, it is pretty big, but think about it. They're really serving 30-something% more of a population than the general ed programs are serving. We have students coming into preschool classes when they're 3 and 4, if in fact they are deemed eligible for them. And then they don't have to graduate at age 18. They can stay until they are 21. And we place them in all kinds of job opportunities. They have job coaches. They're out, we have community-based instruction. They're out learning how to bank. They go out and shop for our senior citizens. We have a great program where they actually go to the senior citizen place, and they go door to door for the people who want to participate, and they take orders, and then they go on the van to ShopRite. They do all the shopping. They use a voucher, a school voucher, and then they come back and they deliver the groceries to the senior citizens. Senior citizens write out a check for them. They bring it back. Then they go to the bank, fill out a deposit ticket. It's a beautiful program, and the senior citizens get dressed up on the days of shopping, delivery. It's really a wonderful program. But those are for our postgraduate students, kids who are between 18 and 21. So there are a lot of special education requirements, both federal and state. In our town, we've reduced about 50 jobs over the last 3 years, and there's a list of all of them. It's horrible, just like Jean outlined. What's really bad about it is that these are people. These are good people, and you have to let them go. It is a terrible climate. It upsets the parents. It upsets, obviously, the people that you have to let go. But beyond that, you have another consideration. You have tremendous unemployment liability. You're responsible for paying the first 26 weeks and most of the last 20 weeks of that unemployment per person. So while you may be letting go someone who's got a $50,000 job and $17,000 in health benefits, you may be obligated for $25,000 in unemployment benefits that first year. So that mitigates a little bit the savings that you're making. I mentioned what we're doing this year. One interesting thing that happened, we cut our high school program from a 9-period day down to an 8-period day, eliminating one elective that every student could take, and that was not a popular decision. But we cut kindergarten from full day to half day. The parents were so upset about it They went out and raised $500,000. Here's where I go back to that basic building of your budget. They raised $500,000 in order to keep full day next year. So I can take that $500,000, I can't raise taxes for it, but I'll take that $500,000, put it in there, and I can keep the teachers full-time. Part of their salary is being paid by taxes, part of their salary is being paid by this donation from the parents. So it's a climate out there where people are kind of taking sides. It can get ugly. You can have kindergarten people saying, who cares about the kids at the high school having one extra period, let them take it online. You'll have the high school people saying, kindergarten, give me a break, you know, it's just 1 year of your life, we don't need a full day program, I didn't have a full day program, and I'm okay. So you've got people fighting. Within that, when we reduced the number of teachers at the high school, then we had the teachers fighting. They were saying, why are we letting go some science teachers? Let go the gym teachers, what do they do? And it's a really unfortunate, negative environment. On top of which it's negative environment for the faculty in general, because I think they feel they've kind of been besieged, you know, in Trenton, and a lot of bad press about teachers this past year. So we don't know what the future holds. We are holding our breath until next Tuesday when we hear the governor's budget address, and within 48 hours they must release our state aid figures to us. We don't know if we'll be cut more. I don't think we're going to get more, but as I say, we're holding our breath and hoping for the best. So I'd be happy later on to answer any questions that you have, or if you have any now that I could answer.
Nope, hold questions to the end.
Oh, good. We're holding questions to the end. Write it down.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Jonathan Busch. I know that Valerie suggested that a superintendent a good superintendent doesn't sit, just walks around. I think a good lawyer should sit. Nobody wants a lawyer in their face, obviously. Anyway, thanks for having me. As Valerie began to mention, the big day for all the school districts, obviously, is February 22nd. That's Tuesday. That's when Governor Christie is going to tip his hat, his administration's hand, as to where the budget figures are going this year, where school districts are going to be, how much money school districts are going to be getting. The reality is that everybody thinks of Tuesday as the day, but you know, as Valerie mentioned, he has 48 hours by law to actually get the individual districts their money. So in people's minds, they're thinking, okay, Tuesday I'll find out my state aid figures, but as people who work in school districts can attest to, you don't always find out that day or the next day. But anyway, so you have 48 hours and you'll really learn how much you're working with. In a lot of districts, this is what they call, in our industry, silly season. This is the time of year where, as Jean mentioned, you have your late night meetings. You have some of your more interesting public comments, and if you can call them comments, argumentative arguments are often more frequent among board members, between the board and the public sometimes. Between the public, you know, these are the meetings where, if you're going to have an officer at your Board of Education meetings, these are the ones where you tend to want that. In most districts, that's not a problem, but I've seen it where it can get pretty heated. So in a lot of districts, you're seeing already these sort of budget meetings, and this week I covered a couple, for example, with for 2 boards of education, and you'll see there, this is the time where boards of education, conscientious boards of education, are getting a sense from the public and the board members as to exactly what it is that they want to see in their budgets. But there's, you know, we still haven't even reached the statutory time frame, which doesn't even begin until after the governor's address, which is Tuesday. Then you've got the 48 hours. So say if the 22nd is the governor's address, the 24th, which is, I guess, Thursday, is the deadline for the figures. The board must then adopt a preliminary budget by March 4th, which is then filed with the Executive County Superintendent of Schools. Now, I may just be throwing names around. I understand sometimes when you're in industry, you tend to use acronyms and throw out things that assume that everyone knows what you're talking about. I don't necessarily, does everybody know what an Executive County Superintendent of Schools are? Maybe some do, some don't. Every county, well, actually that's not true anymore. Most of our counties have Executive County Superintendents of Schools, and there've always been, or for a long time at least, there's always been County Superintendent of Schools, but the Executive County Superintendent of Schools is a relatively new phenomenon. that came into effect, I believe, during the Corzine administration, to be the delegate to the Commissioner of Education and the governor within each county. There's been a lot of coverage of the fact that not all the executive county superintendent schools were asked to come back for the 2011 year. As many of their last days were December 31st, so there's supposedly some structure in place by the Department of Education to ensure that every county is covered somehow. So if you're in a county without an executive county superintendent of schools, and you don't know who you're supposed to be giving your budget to, well, I figure if you don't know by now, shame on the DOE, but maybe give them a call and find out. So in any case, the executive county superintendent of schools will approve the preliminary budget, and that's March 4th. So you have roughly from February 24th to March 4th to have that process take place. By March 18th, school districts are required to advertise a public hearing. And the public hearing is a statutory process. It's required. This is the one hearing that's actually required on the budget. I don't remember if this was the 4 a.m. meeting that Gene is talking about. I think that was after the defeat of the budget. Okay, it was. But this can be a pretty controversial meeting. A lot of times you have school districts that, let's just face it, the public is just not going to approve the budget. I mean, in some places, I don't know, it's been years since a budget's been approved. So this process, in some ways, is less important than a place where the budget has an actual opportunity to pass. I mean, it's important in the sense that you're giving the priorities of the school district, you're setting forth ultimately what will be submitted as a rejected budget to the municipality in a type 2 school district. I just realized I crossed that line again, throwing things out there. A type 2 school district, by the way, is what we have in most cases. Gene referred to it as an elected school district. It's called a type 2 school district in the statute. A type 1 school district is the one where you have an appointed board. But I'm speaking, by the way, in all of these days, I'm speaking with respect to an elected school board, a type 2 school board, which is most of what we have here in New Jersey. So, in a school district where the budget never passes, it's sort of a funny process because you're thinking about what this budget's going to look like when it's not actually going to look like that at the end of the day by the time the municipality gets their hands on it. But again, in a school district where the budget has a good possibility of passing, or even a possibility of passing, it's an important exercise, a particularly important exercise. The public has an opportunity during this hearing. So the notice of the hearing has to be issued by March 18th. And that's something that school districts hopefully do pretty well. By the time March 22nd comes around, that is the statutory deadline this year for the executive county superintendent to actually approve the budget statement to be advertised. Now, the budget statement to be advertised is the budget statement to be advertised is based on the budget that you've given the executive county superintendent of schools. And, just give me 1 second. The same day as March 22nd is the earliest date for public hearing on the budget. So now you can have your public hearing on March 22nd, and you can have that all the way up until March 29th. Now, what's funny is March 22nd this year is on a Tuesday. It actually says in the statute March 22nd, and the last day is March 29th. So this year it's a Tuesday to a Tuesday, but there are times, obviously, when as a result of this timing and the situation 2 years ago, I believe, it would make sense, I guess, that the last day for a public hearing of the budget would take place on a Saturday. So can there be a Board of Education meeting on a Saturday? Yeah, you better believe it. I mean, school boards will tell you that they need every last second to make sure that they have what they have to present to the public. And so by the time a Saturday comes around, if that's the last day that they have to meet, they're going to meet on that Saturday. By April 8th, that's the date, April 8th is the deadline to submit your public question to the county clerk. Some school districts will have an additional public question. For example, if you want to put bleachers in a gymnasium, let's say, and you want to add that, make that separate, obviously, from your budget, and you want to put that as a second public question, that's included on this day as well, and some school districts do that, although in these economic times, they're much less likely to do that. Friday, April 8th is the day to submit your question on the budget and anything else that you have to the county clerk, who obviously would have that as the chief election official in the state, or excuse me, in the county. Your deadline to officially adopt your budget is no later than 18 days prior to the election. And what day of the week is it? A Saturday this year, April 18th. So you may see your Saturday meeting after all on April 18th. I guess it's better than going till 4 o'clock in the morning, but it's still a Saturday, and I think you could probably see some members, I could see some members of the public now saying you're having a meeting on a Saturday to try to avoid us, that type of thing. But that's what's required. And 18 days prior to the election is typically a Friday, but this year, since the election is on a Wednesday, and I'll get into that in a second, they're usually, to this year it's on a Saturday. The budget statement to the Executive County Superintendent of Schools is due on April 19th. That's the last day you have to provide your certification and copy of your official ballot to whoever is your Executive County Superintendent of Schools, whether they're in your county or not. And then you have your school election day, which is supposed to be, I believe, the third Tuesday in April, but this year is April 27th, which is a Wednesday. And the reason for that is because it conflicts this year, that third Tuesday in April conflicts with the Passover holiday, as does Tuesday, April 26th, I think is the last day of Passover. My rabbi would be upset if he knew that I didn't know this off the top of my head, but so the reality is that April 27th is the first non-religious day, and so this year we have a much later than usual school election, which will require, everything will be pushed back. You'll have your reorganization meetings for your new Board of Education happening later. Within 2 days following the election, you have your certified results. And then you have, within 2 days following the certification, if it's a defeated budget, the process continues. And that's the last day for the Board of Education to deliver to their governing body, usually the municipality, the amount approved by voters to be raised for the ensuing school year. So you have to deliver to your municipality the amount that you proposed, and then let the municipality do what they will with it. At that point, the Board of Education has very little control, but you'll notice that they tend to have a lot of negotiations or appeals, if you will, to the municipality. And that sometimes results in joint meetings, which is always very interesting under the Open Public Meetings Act. Having a joint meeting when literally both governing bodies will open their meeting at the same time in the same place. I've seen situations where, I'll tell you in one particular story, without naming a particular place, there was one, the municipality did not typically do the Pledge of Allegiance before their meetings or at the beginning of their meetings, whereas the Board of Education always questioned the Pledge of Allegiance, and they started fighting before they even had discussion about the budget over whether or not they were going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And as this meeting was in the council chambers of the municipality, the municipality, I think it was the mayor or the council president started yelling, "This is our meeting." It's just, you can imagine the egos in that room. Anyway, so that process then would take place, and the municipal governing body has until May 19th, and that's statutory, no matter what day of the week that falls on as well, to make a determination on their Board of Education budget. There is a process for a Board of Education appeal of the budget, but I don't want to take too much more time in terms of the calendar. And so that process would have to be appealed with the commissioner. Restoration is a very tedious process. You have to try to describe why the municipality took too many liberties, for example, with your budget. But there is a significant process in the statutes for that. Now, I think one thing I'd like to raise before I move on to John, if I can, and particularly interesting for reporters, I think, is to consider the role of, and the public, but to consider the role of a Board of Education during the budget process. I think many boards of education naturally, Board of Education members tend to, and this is just in my experience, tend to support the budget, right? They tend to go out there and they tend to say, you really need to support this budget because we just don't want the municipality to have control over this. This is our budget. We want to, to control our own destiny. Of course, you have some people who are on the Board of Education who are against the budget as it has been presented and are advocating its defeat. But again, more cases than not, you have a bunch of people who are advocating for passage of the budget who are also members of the Board of Education. Those members of the Board of Education have to be very, very careful. The administrators for that Board of Education have to be very, very careful. When they're selling the budget, okay, they really should be selling, they should be factually, describing the budget, describing what is contained in the budget, but they have to be concerned that they are taking a position on the election, and it's their election. I mean, the school board is technically hosting the election, and so they cannot push one side over the other. And the seminal case on that is Citizens to Protect Public Funds versus the Parsippany Troy Hills Board of Education. It's a state Supreme Court case where the Board of Education released a vote yes booklet. And obviously the Supreme Court found that that was an illegal act by the Board of Education. So anytime you do anything involving, staff time, your use of school facilities, you have to be careful about your use of school equipment, use of school supplies, to try to advocate for passage or defeat, but usually passage, as we all know. That's a problem, and that's something that should be addressed. Sometimes you have Board of Education members who go out and advocate for the budget because they're, after all, community activists. I mean, the fact that they're on the Board of Education, someone like Gene, said he saw himself in public service. Yeah, I mean, these are people who are generally interested in the goings-on in their town. Of course they're going to have an opinion as to whether or not a budget should pass or be defeated. So, a lot of people around here are probably thinking, well, so are they not supposed to say anything? No, of course they can say something as individuals. But when the context this comes up in is usually in letters to the editor, or I guess in modern times, blog entries. You see a lot of, especially that NJ.com forum, as I'm sure John knows a lot about from his days at Star Ledger. But the NJ.com forum has become, a lot of times people post anonymously, and that's an issue, that's for another forum altogether. But when people post as themselves, for example, as a Board of Education member, and if they go out there and they just say, we really think you pass the budget, is that the Board of Education thinks we have a great budget this year, and you really need to vote for it, that's a problem. Because there could be a perception that you're actually speaking on behalf of the Board of Education. So the School Ethics Commission, who some of you may be familiar with, has issued two advisory opinions on this, but most recently is the one to read if you're interested in this issue is A03-07. It's dated April 2nd, 2007, that says Board of Education members may express their opinions as long as they do so as private individuals. They identify themselves as board members, indicating that their opinion is their own. It's not that of the board, and that the information is accurate and not confidential. So you can't, if you are a Board of Education member, and even if you're saying all these things about the fact that you're a board member and you're not affiliated, you're not speaking on behalf of the board, you still can't disclose confidential information that you've learned by virtue of your position on the Board of Education. Some school districts over the years have tried to use their cable channel. Some boards of education have their own cable channel in particular school districts. They've tried to use their own cable channels to do sort of promotional videos on the budget. There's an Old Bridge case on that said the board's production and distribution of video via cable television advocating passage of the budget was not a proper expenditure of public funds. I think you're getting the idea here. If you're using public funds, you cannot advocate a position one way or the other on the budget. But this happens, and it's going to happen. It's going to come up in almost every school district naturally, just by normal, human feelings and behavior, community activism, that type of stuff. So a lot of times as board attorneys, we end up having a situation where we have to remind people of their roles, and hopefully we don't have to do it in public. We usually like to take people aside. There's also a lot of these sort of town meetings that, especially these days, I think superintendents are becoming more active in the presentation, am I right, Valerie? Among your colleagues as well, of presenting the budget and making sure that people understand what's in the budget. Because like Gene said, if you don't understand what's in the budget, what are you doing even going into the voting booth? You need to know exactly what you're voting on, what it is that the monies go toward. And this is not an easy process, which is, I guess, one of the reasons that Heather called us and invited us to this forum today. This is a very, very complicated series of subjects. So they go around and they advocate, or they go around and they educate on the budget. And those are usually where I find some of the things that are said could be the most problematic for those administrators. So they just have to try to keep a straight face, walk that line, educate. They can remind people to vote. Reminding people to vote is a very civic thing to do, but they can't say vote yes. So anybody who has questions for me, certainly save them for the end, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Hello, everyone. I don't know, lawyers said Superintendent Stan. I'm not quite sure what reporters do. Maybe I should be pointing the mic at you. If you're not overwhelmed already, I'm going to throw a few more things at you. I've been covering education, as Heather said, for 15 years in New Jersey, and before that was a local reporter covering Ridgefield and Leonia and Palisades Park schools. So I'd say I've been covering schools in New Jersey for 20 years. And I have to say, and Gene maybe can speak to this from his experience, who, by the way, is one of the great education journalists of all time. You guys are lucky that Gene was here with us. He's really an astounding figure in my field. But this has been the busiest year for education news I've ever seen in New Jersey. It has been, you know, it's great business. It's great for a new education news startup, I must say. NJ Spotlight has done well for all the news that comes our way, but there's literally things happening every single day in education, statewide education news in New Jersey, and they're also happening on the federal levels. It is incredibly busy. Some would say very exciting time. Certainly, no rest for the weary, but there's a lot on schools' plates. There's a lot on journalists' plates who cover schools, and it's tough to keep track of it all. And if you can pick up some of these tangents and some of these lines in your local communities, you're doing a service, because for the public, it's overwhelming as well. I will give you a state perspective on what's going on as budgets come down, and these are some things that are happening this year that are really relevant in every single one of your towns. And so anything I'm saying here is something that plays out as a local story in every single one of your towns. The obvious one is the tax caps, you've already heard how they work. It is going to be, this is the first year of them, it is going to be, to say the least, tumultuous on what happens in schools and how they cope with this. You're going to see a lot of creative thinking in terms of shared services, in terms of figuring out different ways to do old things, and that is obviously going to be the #1 story. But that's just the beginning in terms of what's coming down. And it's not all Chris Christie. Some of these things started under Corzine and even further back. Some of these things are coming out of President Obama's office, and the federal role is increasing. This is also going to be the first year of, well, it is the first year that there is as you may have heard, there is now a pay cap on superintendent pay. And that is changing contracts, you know, statewide, especially in North Jersey. If you guys are predominantly in North Jersey, where pay is higher, you're seeing a lot of shakeup in terms of superintendent and assistant superintendent if they're untenured. But that is something that's going to really shake the face of schools for years to come. We are about to go, and you may have seen an announcement in the last couple of days, we're about to go into a new way of how we evaluate our teachers. And one thing all of you should look at on your websites, on your local district website, they are compelled by law, and some of them hide it very well, but they are compelled by law to disclose how they evaluate their teachers and where their teachers fall into each criteria. Not naming the teachers, but I don't know if they do it with percentages. I've seen quite a few different ways of doing it. They're supposed to make it prominent. Let's just say it's sometimes Where's Waldo is a good exercise for finding some of these things. And actually a bunch of districts have been held for providing, telling the state that it's on a certain website, and that website actually just says it's under construction or something. So that's something you should look at in every one of your districts. There is, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end on this, but there's also new testing that's going on. You know, we are in a world of testing that's not going away. Accountability is increasing. and you're going to start seeing more and more testing, especially in the high school, and where those tests are going to mean something. End of course exams. There's now a biology test that all freshmen, mostly freshmen, take, which was to count towards graduation. You had to pass to graduation. I think they shoved that back. Is that right? Yep. To be honest with you, not enough kids passed in the trials of it, and they have enough things on their plate, and so they pulled that back as a requirement, but that's still a test. And there's going to be similar thing. I think chemistry is going to also be tested. There's going to be probably a new English test. There's an algebra test. These are things to keep an eye on. Obviously, state aid, Tuesday is going to be a big day in terms of announcing where he's headed. By Thursday, it will be specific numbers. That's obviously going to have a huge impact. I'm guessing this is somewhat informed, but not terribly, not enough that I can write it out, but I'm guessing that it's mostly going to be flat funding for districts. Urban districts may get hit, and this is bringing in the second piece of this, that may get hit in large part because they got a fair amount of federal aid at the beginning of this school year for jobs money. The edu jobs, it was sort of the second phase of the federal stimulus funds. A lot of districts banked that money instead of putting it back into their teachers, banked it for this year. It went predominantly to urban districts, and my guess, and I'm not certain of this, but a pretty good guess is that he's going to apply that federal aid towards their state aid, or at least in making an argument to cut them. Yes, they got this federal aid. And the federal aid was not inconsequential. Newark got about half of its state aid cut back in that federal aid. So it's not a small amount of money. It was something like $20 million in Newark. Charter schools. Anyone here have a charter school in your community? Ooh, a few. Okay, that's a big issue. And obviously, what you pay, what your local districts pay for those charter schools. A quick primer on this, and Valerie maybe can speak more to it, but basically the local district pays 90% of their costs for every child who goes to a charter school. So if you're spending $10,000 a kid in a community, you pay $9,000 to the charter school for every one of your kids that goes there. There is also some money for special ed. It gets complicated on this, and I really probably need Valerie on this, but the way that is split up, the way the state does special ed payments is it's based off of a certain average percentage, and there's a set amount that they pay. It doesn't do with disability anymore. It used to be tiered for disability. I don't think it does that anymore. And so if you have, let's say, 10 out of 100 kids in a district, obviously that's purely hypothetical, but if 10 out of 100 kids in a district go to a charter school, a tenth of that funding that the district gets for those charter school kids, or gets overall, goes also to the charter school. It is one of the reasons, to be honest with you, I don't know if any of you are involved with charter schools, it's one of the disincentives that charter schools have financially to serve special needs kids. And one of the big raps on charter schools is they don't serve a lot of kids with disabilities. And that is true, and part of the reason is there is a financial disincentive for them to do so. And it makes it hard, it makes them skimp on the services, and it makes an active parent, and a lot of parents in charter schools are active, probably lean away from going there and find a better place for their child. So, but the charter schools is a big issue. We know, as you all know, we now have another 20 of them in the state. 23 approved. There's probably going to be about 16 more coming in next year. That is a big chunk of change for suburban districts and for urban districts. Urban districts haven't seemed to complain so much about it. Suburban districts, you're starting to see some real backlash. Princeton's the famous one, where they are now writing a check of $5 million a year to charter schools, and they are of the feeling that the charter schools are meant to be an alternative when the schools are poor. And they don't feel their schools are poor, and that writing a check for, in some cases, very specialized charter schools, and we can talk about that a little bit, but they certainly question the fairness of that, and that has led to a real ruckus in suburban communities, which is being heard in Trenton, because if you'll notice, out of these 23 charter schools that were approved by Christie this year, I think one of them was in a suburban community. So there's clearly some let's just say some of the Republican districts are pushing back a little bit on this big charter school push. And then there's old pressures that are coming to fore, teacher contracts, we talked about that, wage freezes, that's certainly, I think he's going to, you know, I've stopped trying to guess what our governor says, but I'm guessing that he is going to come and talk again about if your district does not do a wage freeze, look hard at their budget and whether you want to approve it again. I think that there will be a lot more pressure on unions to do concessions, not necessarily freezes, but I think you'll see some more move on that. They are not where they were a year ago. Special education mandates certainly are as pervasive as ever and very difficult. A lot of districts are bringing students back into their districts to try to save some money on that, as well as, you know, the obvious benefits of having these kids educated in a setting among their peers. But there's a lot of pressure on that as well because some districts aren't ready to handle that. You had a quick question?
Yeah, if you explain a little bit more how that works with special education, what is required?
Well, I mean, what's required is if a student has a disability, a school is first of all required to identify those children and to evaluate them for that disability. So there's a process that just to get to that point. If they are determined to have a disability through that evaluation, and there's a few steps to that, they get what is called an IEP. I think it stands for an individualized education program. Is that pretty close? Yep. I didn't know plan or program. There's plan. Okay. And every child who has a special disability would have an IEP, and that IEP is laying out their goals and their programs, everything about what kinds of services they get, whether they have an aide, whether they have the kinds of curriculums, the whole program that is used on it. And part of that IEP may be that it's a separate school altogether, that they cannot be provided in the local district, and certainly kids with you know, very strong severe disabilities, that's a bigger challenge for districts. Autism, you don't need to be told about the numbers in New Jersey there. And so part of the IEP may be the requirement that they, or maybe the agreement, and these are negotiated items, and you know, I'd be remiss not to say that lawyers are not involved in these as well, and it's a very litigious area. What's that? Oh, 1 out of 94, well, there's 1 out of 94 children, and this is one national, it's a couple years old now, and it only did 15 states, which were, you know, and it was somewhat selective to the states, but we had by far the highest rate. It was 1 out of 94 births was on the spectrum. Now, the spectrum, as you may know about autism, is very wide, and it can go from those with very severe disabilities to Asperger's-like and situations like that, who very well can be served in a mainstream setting. So those are, but back on the, we also have the highest rate, and it's a long history, but we have the highest rate of students who go to outside schools. And they're private schools, by far the highest rate in the country. In part, it's part of it, we're a victim of our own success. New Jersey was one of the first states in the country to even recognize special education as a need. When other states were warehousing kids, New Jersey was starting to address it. But it also created a lot of these schools. And they're expensive. There's no doubt $80,000, $100,000 a kid, potentially, depending on the need. So these are all pressures that are enormous. And when you hear a school talk about spending $200,000 to send a kid to a special school, that's what they're talking about. And sometimes you've even seen, you know, I've seen numbers even go higher than that. So these are all things you're going to be facing in every single one of your communities. How do I suggest you cover it? Good luck. One thing, and I think it's important for me as I go back into this, is get a sense of your community's history of school budgets, and you know, what are the trends? What are the trends in voting? What are the trends in spending? I think we all sort of look at a single snapshot, and it really doesn't give you a sense of where a community is moving. And I think, you know, those in the community don't know. And if you guys have any graphing capabilities, or you have a cousin who has graphing capabilities, you know, some good charts of how spending has grown. Counter that to how enrollment changes. Oftentimes in school budget discussions, you don't know that enrollment has grown significantly or that it's shrinking, and it's a question that should be asked. Certainly, as you see a board's proposal and what they plan to do, don't stop there. That is obviously your starting point, but ask questions. When they say class sizes are going to go up, talk, get a little more detail about that. And we've been through a year, if not a couple of years, of real test cases, and we're seeing what happens. And find out, you start seeing that class sizes indeed are starting to move into the 30s, and I've even heard the 40s. But also ask what are the smallest classes. And these are questions and I'm not saying that the AP classes should be cut, but in the striving to hold on to some of these very specialized classes, they've gotten pretty small. And so these are questions. You want to get into the details. Now, is it easy to get into the details when suddenly the pressure's on? And this brings me to a larger point. Before all this begins, now you have a week, so this may not be, but as we move into the future, any local journalist should build a relationship with their schools as one of the very starting points in their coverage, and not necessarily when the crisis is hit. Get to know the superintendent, get to know a principal, get to know the teachers union. It's a lot easier. Get to know them over coffee instead of over a picket line. It's a lot easier. It helps you answer some of these questions. I also get into the schools, and I tell this to young reporters. And certainly, if you want to get to know your community, the school is pretty much a great place to start. You see the diversity of it. You see the sense of it, the culture of it. I do believe that our public schools are really our last town square in a lot of these communities. We don't have communal centers anymore except for our schools. And I think it's a great way I think we all think we know our communities, but things are changing. And certainly the diversity is changing a lot. And I think it's a great way to get into it. Go grab that teacher contract and read it. It's a little dull, but there are some gems in there. And you should know it. It is driving, as Valerie said, it drives 80%, arguably 70 to 80% of the budget. Get to know what's in there. Get to know what the perks are. Read that salary guide, and that's its own session. But the salary guide is very critical to how teachers are paid, where the starting pay is, where those bubbles are that Jean was talking about, they do exist, where the longevity pay is a bit in there. Also, this is also supposed to be, and not to put you on the spot here, but also supposed to be on the website. The superintendent's contracts are supposed to be up there as well. Worth taking a look. Again, sometimes hidden, not easy to find. Usually you look, there's different ways to do it. I usually look at human resources, personnel, and then it's about 4 clicks, and then you'll see contracts, things like that. But that's in there. Take a look. Those have become more and more boilerplate. Back to our earlier point with superintendent caps, there's not a lot you can do, get creative with, but in the past they were. And then a central point, and I'm going to do a little shameless marketing here, but I think it's a central point as well. Relate that budget to student performance. Look at the test scores, look at other measures that exist, and how that budget is addressing where those deficiencies and strengths are. I think we often, and it's, schools are in crisis mode, so they're not able to add a whole lot to address their needs in these days. But I think that's the bottom line, isn't it? I mean, that's what we really care about, is whether our kids are learning. The tests aren't perfect, but they are all we got. And this is my shameless marketing bit. New Jersey Spotlight has a school report card on our site that we are offering all hyperlocals as a widget to put on their sites, which allows you to see some basic test score results and spending. I will leave my card, and I'm certainly willing to talk to anybody about how to do this. And it's fairly easy to do. I think a couple people here I've spoken to in the past and want to do it, and we offer it. We offer all of our stories for free. If they relate to your community, as long as you give us credit, feel free to put it up on your site. But the report card, I think, is something that is of value to local communities. I think we do it pretty well. I hope you at least take a look at it. But there's a ton of data on how subgroups are doing, how different, learning disability, low income, and I think these are issues that you should be looking at those in the context of the budget and vice versa as well. So those are some ideas. I'm happy to take questions along with the rest of them. I think this is an important topic that a real great opportunity for hyperlocal sites to make a difference. Because I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons we started our site is because mainstream media is not covering this stuff as much anymore. So, how do you want, Heather? Do you want to?
I don't know.
Start from left to right. Left to right.
Wow. I saw your hand up first, so like.
Could you talk a little bit about how the federal funding for special education works and percentages the districts are getting and feelings or promises around those?
Yeah, there is federal funding. It's called IDEIA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. That's the federal piece. That is not in the general budget. That's outside the budget. And that is a supplement. It must be a supplement to what a district provides. It cannot supplant services that a district provides. And that is based strictly on a census of the numbers of special education students in your district. You can get anywhere, I have an 80 million plus budget. We get about $1.5 million from the feds, if that gives you any idea. If you have a much smaller budget of 20 million, you're probably getting 100,000, 200,000. It's not a lot.
The notion on that, and you'll hear this thrown around a lot, is it was supposed to provide 40%, the whole breakdown was 40% federal, 40% state, 20% local. Hasn't worked out that way. It's probably about 60% local and 20/20. Yeah, it different breaks, but it is not. Yeah, it's not anywhere close to what at least was intended to be, and that is added. And the point was to take the pressure off local districts where they're not making budget decisions about special ed services, because to be honest with you, that's the last thing we should be doing for kids with the greatest needs. But it hasn't worked out that way.
I can tell you in my history, a few years back, I've covered a couple of exceptionally small school districts, and for them, they saw that as an extraordinary pressure because there really was no law of averages you could look at over the course of several years and get a rough guesstimate to what the special ed cost would be. When you had so few students in the first place, the difference of just a few with extraordinary needs.
You can have one student move into your town on March 2nd it was in a residential placement of $400,000 and it becomes your obligation. There's no way you could have predicted that or budgeted for it.
Right, and proportionate to their entire budgets, that was extraordinary.
Steve?
No, on that topic, I've heard that certain towns or New Jersey as a whole is kind of a magnet for difficult special needs. And we're the first ones to this as a state, and there are different towns that are considered more generous.
Yeah, I won't mention anyone at the table. It's actually, there are towns that, as a reporter, who didn't want to talk to me about their special ed programs because of some fear of attracting, of being too popular, because it is expensive. And there are some that are excellent. And New Jersey as a whole is ahead of a lot. New Jersey also spends a lot of money per kid, and it makes us attractive for a lot of different reasons. And it makes us attractive, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's one of the reasons why you're starting to see this privatizing schools debate going on with vouchers and the like. There's a lot of money spent on schools. We're all suffering, I know, and it's tough on schools, but we spend on average it depends on how you count it, but $15,000, $17,000 a kid, and that is close to twice the national average. So if you're a company out there that's looking to start a private school, New Jersey's not a bad place to be looking at.
So we could just mention one thing, and one of the things you're seeing, especially in these preliminary budget discussions that I'm seeing at the meetings I've been covering the last couple of weeks, you're noticing that, of course, it's more and more of a push, and you see this in the discussions among board members even, the push to bring services in-house. The problem is with the limited budgets now, how are you going to make that, how are you going to take that big step now to do that? So yes, long-term, perhaps bringing these services in-house is something that will save these districts a lot of money. In the short term, you have to have that initial investment, and the state is just unwilling to provide that.
And more and more schools are combining, so that they can be having a shared program that can serve a bunch of different towns for autism.
Yes, Valerie, this question is for you. I wanted to know, in your school district, or in many, you can make it a generalization, what percent of your staff, this is a two-part question, are duplicated? For example, do you have principals that have 2 secretaries, administrators that have 2 secretaries? And are those people part of the contract that goes out?
I have one secretary. In our elementary buildings, there are 2 secretaries. Our elementary schools range from 600 to 750 students. You need 2 secretaries just for answering the phone, parents coming in with lunches, all of that, the kids coming down sick to the office. We're pretty tight on our clerical staffing, but in our district and in almost every district in the state, the clerical people are included in the teacher's contract. In some districts that are very large, they will have the custodians in a separate association. Administrators are always in a separate association, but for the most part, aides, lunchroom aides, teachers, guidance counselors, secretaries, they're all in the same association.
Thank you.
Actually, my question is similar. We recognize that administration is necessary and many administrative functions are in fact mandated, but there's a widespread perception that school districts are a place of administrative load. So can you give us some practical tips for tracking down where administrative money shows up in the budget and understanding what's bloat and what's necessary?
John mentioned the school report card. The Department of Ed puts out a school report card. It just was released maybe 2 weeks ago, something like that. But in March, the department then puts out a report called the Comparative Spending Guide. And it saves you a lot of time because it has about, it depends from year to year, but about 20 indicators. One would be cost per pupil, one is a comparative cost per pupil, teacher salaries per pupil. It breaks it all down, administrative cost per pupil, and it ranks school districts in the state. It divides school districts into 3 categories: small ones, medium size, and then the largest one is schools with over 3,500 students in grades K through 12. In that category, my category, I'm always very sensitive to that, and we do a lot of presentations on that as part of our budget each year. Last year's comparative spending guide, there were 105 school districts in that category, and we were the 5th lowest administratively. So we're very sensitive to your bloating comment, but yes, I'm aware that it's out there. It's the best place to see what your administrative costs are in your district compared to other similar sized districts in the state. That will be released, it's usually released about the 2nd week of March from the New Jersey Department of Education, and it'll be on their website. You could go on their website now and see last year's report, and it'll give you a real good indication of where your town stands on all of those costs.
What's the name of it?
It's called the New Jersey Department of Education Comparative Spending Guide. It's on the website for the last, as a matter of fact, you can access like 10 years worth of the spending guide.
Out more detail, we're probably not going to find this in the budget per se, but in conversation with school administration and the Open Public Records